Hello, my name is Stuart, the unrepentant atheist. Thank you for visiting my channel. So today I want to talk about the Christian doctrine of redemption, because we've got a potential, what could you call it, paradox perhaps, between the idea of justice and redemption. So what is Christian redemption? And I think that what you can say about the doctrine of redemption is essentially that whatever you've done in life, whatever bad things you've done, that if you submit to Jesus and you have faith in Jesus, you can be saved and you can go to heaven. Now, we saw this in the gospel accounts. Jesus is on the cross and he's flanked by, I think they're described as two robbers, but it's been pointed out by some historians that in those days the Romans tended to crucify men who were murderers, that stealing wasn't necessarily a capital offense. So Jesus, one of the robbers says to Jesus, remember me um, when you're in heaven. And Jesus says to him, you also will be there with me. So he accepts this criminal on the basis of his, well, what could you call it? Last moment redemption. He's saved, and presumably, at least within what I think is the fiction of Christianity, he will end up in heaven with Jesus and all the other saved souls. So there's actually, from what I can see about Christian theology, there's only one criteria for getting into heaven, and that is basically belief in Jesus as the Savior and complete faith. So, what to say about this? Because we've got some potentially quite unpleasant things to point out. If it's true that you can get into heaven no matter what you've done through last minute redemption, what would it mean potentially? Well, let's look at one or two other things first, because we've got we've got a lot of conversions going on in in prisons in America, on death row. We've got many murderers going in, multiple murderers going into death row. They've been sentenced to death, and they're having to wait years and years and years before finally there's an execution. There's a long legal process, and a lot of them are actually converting to Christianity. They're doing divinity degrees and all sorts of stuff. So, I mean, these are a lot of people who have committed absolutely vile crimes, unspeakable, violent murderers, and all sorts of multiple serial killers. They've raped and tortured, they've killed children, and then they're converting to Christianity when they get into prison. Now, look, I'm against the death penalty. You know, I don't want to go into that, but obviously, one can look at it cynically and say that they're only converting because they're hoping the parole board is going to let them out. But there's not really any evidence for that, because I was reading an article today about this subject, and it seems that all those who are converting, that it's not saving them, or at least it's not saving them in this world, but it may well be that they think it's going to save them in the next. So this is the whole thing. This is the whole unpleasant, unpalatable thing, is that we all want justice. Now, those of us who are atheists and who reject any idea of an afterlife accept that we can only have justice within the limits of this world that we know, that there is no justice beyond There's no justice beyond the material world. There just isn't. That when you die, that's absolutely that is the end of it. So with Christianity, the way that it works is, of course, that if you lead a life of evil and you're not saved, you will perish in hell. But if you don't accept Jesus into your heart, you will also perish in hell. So I would say, where is the justice in that? That a multi-murderer, a serial killer, is going to end up in the same place as me and all the other non-believers. I don't really see that as just. It doesn't sound to me like justice. But the more disturbing thing is this idea of redemption, that you could have Hitler, and who's to say that this didn't happen, that he didn't commit suicide, because we don't actually know. He didn't commit suicide, that in fact he had a Christian priest there with him at the time. He took Hitler's confession, and Hitler redeemed himself and was saved by accepting Jesus into his heart. And then he was shot and killed. According to Christian doctrine, he's now sitting in heaven. He may well be sitting in heaven in the clouds next to millions of Christians who he killed. So this is the absurdity of the doctrine of redemption. And the biggest sin is, in fact, to be an unbeliever. It's bigger than any sin. It's bigger than all the horrible murders that you could do. Okay, I could say that to me it sounds a bit too absurd to be true. But that's not why I don't believe it. Not because it's absurd, which it is. I don't believe it, of course, because there's no evidence for it. But I wonder whether really Christians appreciate that they're signed up to a doctrine which allows people like Hitler into heaven. Do they actually fully really understand what redemption means? Because that's the whole point about it. So just briefly, I've noticed on the Atheist Experience and other atheist shows, Talk Heathen, etc., I've noticed Christians often come on and, there's a conversation and they get backed into a corner. They realize that they've got no good reason to believe. And at the end of it, they will say to the atheists, "What do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" Aha, we've got you, because all the unbelievers will be roasting in hell. And they say it almost with a kind of satisfaction. Now, it's odd that, because you don't see those same Christians going to people who've done despicable things and saying, "What do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" No, they come to people who probably are doing good deeds, they're doing charitable deeds, they're helping the homeless, and their only sin is that they don't believe in Jesus. And Christians are coming and saying, "What do you think is going to happen to you when you die?" So they've got some kind of warped sense of what justice really is. But justice, as we know it, this is just to sum up a little bit, is only dispensed in the real world. And Dostoevsky, coming back to him, because a lot of people come back to him, he made this statement that if there's no God, then anything is permissible. Now, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of people have taken this to mean that means that it's okay to do anything on earth. That, no, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean that it's okay to do anything in this life, because quite clearly we've got a judicial system, and you can't just do what you want, because frankly, we've got judicial systems, we've got society, and we have ways of dealing with people who do bad things. I think what he means is that you can do whatever you want in this life, safe in the knowledge if there's no God, that you're not going to have to pay for it when you die and you go into the afterlife. I think that's what it means. And I would like to back him up, actually, and say from that point of view, I absolutely agree with him, because obviously I don't think there is an afterlife. I don't think there's a God. And I think that apart from the justice systems and the penal systems that we have in this world, there's nothing for a criminal to fear in the after death, nothing at all. And that's why there are a lot of vile people around. There are a lot of mafia bosses, people who are quite happy to exploit and do despicable, horrible things. And they sleep easily at night in their beds. And they've got their own rationale for living. They've got their own rules. And as long as they don't get caught, or as long as earthly justice doesn't catch up with them, they're quite happy doing what they do. And if they can escape the justice system, as in fact some have, and we've seen this in Britain with Jimmy Savile, he never had to pay for his crimes. And I'm fairly convinced, well, okay, he's an odd example because he was a Catholic. He had a weird rationale that if he did lots of good deeds, it would somehow balance him up. So he actually believed he would go to heaven because he did work for hospitals, etc. So let's not talk about him. Talk about other criminals who somehow managed to get through life without being caught, and they will face no divine justice. They will face no issues in the afterlife. So just to recap, it's a strange paradox, this thing about redemption and the idea of justice, because redemption doesn't deliver any kind of justice in the way that we mean, because people who've done awful things and led really evil lives can be rewarded by an eternity in heaven just simply by doing something which I consider to be relatively meaningless, in having faith in Jesus Christ. Where is the virtue in that? Given that there's not any evidence that any of this is true. Okay, well, I think I'm going to stop it there because I'm going to try and make my videos shorter. If you've got any comments on what I've said, particularly the idea of Hitler going to heaven, which according to Christian doctrine is actually true, and the fact that it's a bit of in my opinion, it's a bit of a paradox, this whole thing about justice and redemption. And somehow the whole thing doesn't really make any sense. And I agree with Dostoevsky. It makes much more sense that if there is no God, everything's permitted in the sense that there's only justice in this world and there's actually nothing to fear from the afterlife. So that's all for now, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.